Get ready, fellow time travelers, because you're about to embark on a journey so grueling it will make your last camping trip look like a 5-star resort. Welcome to Why You Wouldn't Last a Day in Ancient Egypt and More, where we peel back the layers of those iconic pyramids to reveal the hot mess that was daily life in the land of the Nile. Picture this. It's 3,000 years ago, and you're sweating your butt off under the relentless Egyptian sun, which, by the way, is not really known for its mercy. It's more like a mental torture device disguised as a celestial body. Your choices: sleep in a mud brick box, dine on stale bread, and risk everything just to appease the pantheon of gods who seem more interested in your next offering than your basic human rights. Can you even imagine the Yelp reviews? 2 stars, just way too much sand, and food options were severely limited. Would not recommend unless you enjoy suffering. In this documentary, we'll introduce you to the harsh realities of ancient Egyptian living conditions, where the term bare necessities was taken to a punishing new level. You thought your closet was bursting with stuff? Try living without a closet, let alone a decent pair of shoes. Speaking of footwear, how about waking up each morning to rocky terrain and deciding which part of your foot to sacrifice to the gods of the underworld today? But it's not all poverty and endless toil. We'll also wade through the muddy waters of Egyptian traditions and beliefs, where good luck charms are as common as the flies buzzing around your barley. Yes, you heard me right. They took life and death so seriously that it seems they'd thought about more ways to die than those available at a modern escape room. And, because no ancient civilization is complete without a side of intrigue, we'll sprinkle in some ironic tales of devotion, sweat, and questionable ritual practices that would make even your most eccentric friend raise an eyebrow. But wait, there's a twist. Just when you thought you couldn't handle the heat, we'll take you across the ocean to Mesoamerica, where another ancient civilization was thriving under their own set of delightfully torturous customs that are surprisingly similar to the Egyptians. I mean, who doesn't love a good human sacrifice paired with a side of corn? So buckle up as we mix sharp wit with a hefty dose of sarcasm, and get ready to discover why you would definitely not last a day in ancient Egypt, or Mesoamerica, for that matter. Spoiler alert, the air conditioning is non-existent and the drama is on another level entirely. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the pyramids loom like overachieving skyscrapers, and the Nile flows as the original highway of riverboat shenanigans. The year? 1300 BCE, amid a drought so dire that even the camels considered taking up vegetarianism. But amidst all this, the most serious matter deemed worthy of the pharaoh's attention was cucumbers. Picture this: a sun-soaked royal banquet in a hall boasting more opulence than a modern-day Las Vegas casino. The lighting: a dazzling array of flaming torches which do little to mask the odor of sweating nobility and rotting fowl. The air is infused with the frenzied smells of frankincense and the lingering perfume of desperation. The sounds of laughter erupt occasionally, only to be drowned out by the obnoxious slapping of enthusiastic flies. Enter Pharaoh Akhenaten, the original misunderstood artist, who decided to make vegetables fashionable. His court, a mix of sycophants and overzealous chefs, stands anxious over a platter of cucumbers so lavishly garnished with golden henna that one would swear it was enshrined in a tomb. In this moment, the cucumber has achieved its ultimate status, not just a salad ingredient, but an edible status symbol. Now, cucumbers are often regarded as harmless, crunchy companions. But in the political climate of Egypt, they're anything but innocent. Once, in a fit of royal paranoia, Akhenaten drafted a declaration proclaiming cucumbers as the latest threat to the monarchy. You see, cucumbers were associated with fertility rites, the kind that made courtiers squirm. Picture the options. A reigning pharaoh could either consummate his rule or anoint his son with a cucumber, and perhaps forego future breakfasts with a side of squawk and scandal. As tensions boiled, courtiers took turns sniffing the cucumbers like they were the last fleeting scents of a dying pharaoh. During a test of extremities, the chief taster was instructed to pop a slice right into his mouth while blindfolded, eliciting gasps and whispers as he chewed in terror. The room fell silent as they awaited a brave king's verdict on the vegetable. The chief taster, regrettably jelly-legged from ingesting something so treacherous, stumbled upon a revelation instead. "It's refreshing," he managed to croak out, while the crowd blinked in disbelief at the audaciousness of his taste buds. A wave of laughter erupted, soon overtaken by speeches of rebellion about the tyranny of cucumbers. Tensions peaked when the high priest, decked out in the latest linen, jumped on a table, declaring that the cucumbers were sowing seeds of dissent, explaining how the very act of chopping cucumbers had unleashed the spirits of long-forgotten deities. The absurdity reached its zenith as frenzied nobles began brandishing their forks like curators showcasing modern sculptures, pledging to cleanse the cucumber threat from the kingdom. As the uproar continued, a troop of servants entered with the most ludicrous yet effective solution: a giant platter of pickled cucumbers facing the sun, an offering to send the spirits home. As if touched by divine fermentation, the cucumbers seemed to glisten with a new life while seated in sunlight, much to the delight yet horror of Akhenaten, who just wanted a peaceful evening. In the end, the matter of cucumbers was resolved mere moments later. The royal chef packaged the entire platter for a journey along the Nile, dubbing it Cucumbers a la Pharaoh, to be served lavishly at a feast in honor of a neighboring kingdom's king. The irony dripped heavier than the Nile, as this ridiculous fruit symbolizing depression and fertilization became a diplomatic delicacy. So what did we learn from our fantastical cucumber calamity? When in ancient Egypt, remember, a cucumber could decide the fate of your summer and your throne. So stick to olives and stay out of royal salad bars. In the year 2000 BC, Egypt was known for two things: the grandeur of its pyramids and the questionable life choices of its elite. Picture this: a sandy afternoon beneath a merciless sun, where the air smells faintly of spices, cured meats, and an undercurrent of something that could only be described as eternal desolation. Welcome to the world of mummification, where your eternal afterlife begins with a somewhat elaborate and costly process. The scene opens in a bustling mortuary workshop. Not so much as a sacred space as it is a mummification factory. The lighting is a chaotic mix of warm flames and shadowy corners, where the ceremonial incense burns hotter than a pharaoh's temper when someone dare cheat at Senate. Enter the mummification manager. Let's call him Imhotep the Incompetent. Dressed in linen that could barely be considered standard grave attire, he wields a knife like it's a butter churner, preparing for what promises to be an unforgettable blend of embalming and amateur surgery. Floaty wafts of natron, a savory blend of salt and despair, mingle with the occasional human squeak interspersed with the eerie sounds of funeral hymns laminating the walls. The food at the center of this odd art? Think less a grand feast for the dead and more a one-way ticket to the afterlife. Here, the menu includes rotting fish, aged fruits, and the pièce de résistance, spiced meats that would make a rabid hyena reconsider. As Imhotep rolls up his sleeves, you can sense the absurdity brewing. It's all fun and games in ancient Egypt until someone forgets the step involving take the brain out through the nose. Imagine the tension. Assistants are gently nudging each other, eyes wide with the paralyzing fear of hosting an unsanctioned funeral malpractice conference. To mummify a body properly, you're going to need a slew of ingredients that would make even your average grocery list feel underwhelming. First, slap on some natron, because what's a good mummification without a splash of salt? Then, throw in a generous dollop of oils and a spritz of essential what-were-they-thinking oils, because nothing screams eternal life quite like a petrified body smelling like a refreshing spa day. Step 1. Anoint the body with oils. Please don't mix them up with those cooking oils your aunt uses for her famous fried secrets. And what about the Superman of the process? The brain must go elsewhere step, where inner organs visit the land of the forgotten. As you can imagine, this sparks an array of quirky superstitions and paranoia. An assistant may dare to ask, what if I accidentally drop the heart? Am I now destined to wander the desert with the soul's scrap paper? Yet, amidst the chaos, Imhotep manages to channel his inner artist, wrapping the body with a panache that can only be described as DIY. At its worst, he fumbles with bandages that resemble the aftermath of a cotton candy explosion, wrapping the deceased tighter than an over-enthusiastic burrito. Just when you think things couldn't get more outlandish, he, patient, reschedules a meeting with a local priest to ensure spirits are not offended and the gods are appeased, setting the stage for the ultimate finale. Bury me with a side order of dignity, please. Amid the wildly humorous misadventures of wrapping and smelling bad, the culmination unfolds when Imhotep realizes he forgot to document the process in hieroglyphics. An ancient scribe is suddenly thrown into a frenzy as he sculpts what will be the before and after video of the embalming journey, while the entire mummification workshop coughs nervously in tandem, a reminder of the vast existential dread that awaits them all. And how did it end? After months of prep and unraveling the conspiracy of auspicious inscriptions, the mummified body looks less like a revered ruler and more akin to a sad Halloween decoration left in the sun. But hey, at least they had some fantastic snacks to munch on. Historical note: mummification was thought to ease the transition to the afterlife, requiring a staggering amount of resources, much to the bewilderment of those in the ancient Egyptian economy, who would argue that a solid burial could very well rival the price of a good chariot. So, the lesson here? When considering long-term investments, perhaps opt for a more practical approach. After all, nobody listens when you say, "I want to die in style." Welcome to the opulent days of ancient Egypt, circa 2500 BC, where the Nile flows majestically and the scent of camels is matched only by the tang of burnt offerings. Picture the scene: a grand banquet hall that could easily double as an ungodly reflection pool for the egos of pharaohs and courtiers alike. The soft flicker of oil lamps throws shadows that dance along the hieroglyphics, whispering tales of excess. Or perhaps it's just the 100,000 bees buzzing furiously over a table laden with questionable delicacies. Enter Pharaoh Snefru, the man who endorsed what can only be described as the snack trends of his day. Unlike in your average modern office, the pharaoh's pantry didn't just hold peanuts and trail mix. It contained an array of suspiciously fermented fish, honey that had probably tasted better when it came out of the bee, and a collection of bread rolls that were rumored to have an impressive shelf life lasting through 3 dynasty changes. The air is thick, not just with the smell of rich stews boiling away, but also with the anxiety of an unmarked bowl that sits ominously in the center of the table. What could be inside? A delicacy of roasted quail, a poisonous trap, or perhaps a revered sacred offering to the sun god. Choice decisions, really. But here's the kicker. The food was an all-out Egyptian conspiracy against poor Snefru. The court was riddled with backstabbers, or, as they called them, advisors, who had made it their mission to get rid of him before the high tide of the Nile washed away any chance of a successor that had a set of decent social skills. Consider this. Every dish at a pharaoh's table came with the distinct possibility of being a tool of usurpation. You would think someone would turn the kitchen into something akin to a medical lab, but no, they preferred ancient culinary roulette. As our reluctant pharaoh digs into his spiced lentil stew, tension mounts. Is it too spicy? Is it subtly poisoned? Did the royal chef sneak in a bit too much lamb's fat? To his left, the chief cupbearer whispers warnings mingling rumors of grain shortages. To his right, the Grand Vizier assures him the fish are just out to get him, literally. Waiters flit nervously, possibly for their very lives, as they comically dodge falling figs while trying to keep their composure amid the chaos. Just as Snefru contemplates whether he's just ingested a culinary bomb, the tension breaks. A loud crash announces the entrance of Princess Kemet, the only one in the room who could dismiss a threat with a mere lifted eyebrow. She storms in, arms filled with what look like the most immense pomegranates you've ever seen, shouting, "Behold, the fruit of fertility!" The court is silenced, and not just because of her grandiloquence. No one actually knows what to do with fertility, except perhaps to enter into more strenuous tax debates. As she gestures dramatically towards the pomegranates, the tension dissolves like ancient bread on spicy stew, and suddenly, everyone can't help but focus on the exhilarating game of mash the pomegranate instead of plotting against the pharaoh. Indoor sports suddenly became a distraction from potential dining disasters. All is well. The dangerous stew fades now into the background, a mere side dish. Pomegranates fly through the air. Laughter erupts. Toxicity of suspicion is replaced by the sweetness of fruit juices raining down on heads. Historical context. While the pharaohs maintained a firm hand on their tottering thrones, it turns out food was one area they often miscalculated, completely neglecting basic kitchen hygiene or ingredient sourcing. I mean, why rely on food safety when you can rely on your pyramid allegations and divine backing? So, what's our takeaway from this hot mess of ancient dining? French fries can't betray you, but evidently, lentils can make you far less popular. Remember, if you're in Egypt, it's not about which food you eat, but whose food can slip a knife into your back while handing you the side salad. In the year 1500 BCE, in the sun-baked, sand-swept expanse known as ancient Egypt, the aftermath of last night's garlic-themed feast hung thick in the air. And by thick, I mean you could slice it with a knife and use it to fend off any bothersome ghosts. Picture it. The great pharaoh himself, adorned in a golden headdress and wearing a tunic so long it could double as a parachute, was throwing the most epic garlic bash the Nile had ever seen. The sunlight caught glimmers of the opulent spread, shimmering philosophically above a banquet table that could easily accommodate a small village. The smell? A pungent fusion of charred lamb and roasted garlic that might just be a precautionary measure against any sniffles or potential assassins. As the grand festivities rolled on, commoners and nobles alike anticipate the culinary arts that would challenge even the bravest taste buds. Enter the royal chef, a mustachioed figure with a penchant for culinary absurdity. His masterpiece was a bowl of garlic stew, bubbling away like a volcano that was overwrought and very much overqualified for its task. The atmosphere crackled with tension as guests knew full well that garlic was much more than a seasoning. It was a political weapon, a culinary responsibility. Rumor had it that the pharaoh, always in a healthy competition with his closest rival, intended to use this aromatic dish to ensure his enemies met their doom, quite literally and nosily, in the lavatories. As gleeful laughter echoed through the hall, filled with the clinking of silverware and the occasional hiccup, the guests couldn't shake the growing paranoia. Eyewitness accounts of rival nobles disappearing after garlic-rich dinners fueled the collective fear, making legs tremble as if spindly tables were about to collapse under secret weight. One secretary whispered loudly across the banquet, "What if the garlic binds them, then they cannot escape like in that time of the slippery figs?" Just as a hushed silence settled like dust, the pharaoh poured the golden broth into intricately carved bowls, garnished with a sprig of mint delicately coated in a tangy glaze. Each guest was handed their treasure with pomp and flair. But there was no time for pleasantries. Fingers twitched and eyes darted as everyone contemplated whether the boisterous laughter of the evening would turn into hollow cries of betrayal. With royal decree echoing in the hall, "To your health or to your doom?" Everyone took their first heroic bite, hoping against hope they wouldn't become another garlic ghost story later. The air turned tense. A rhythm of gulping was the only sound amid swirling dread. And then it happened. One guest, filled with a loud and unfortunate bravado, laughed, raised his arms in victory, and let out a belch so mighty it could scare proverbial mummies back to their crypts. A wave of nervous laughter erupting like bursting grapeseed under a foot. But, oh, what awaited them was beyond their garlic-infused nightmares. Moments later, the royal chef collapsed in laughter, revealing that the stew he created was a golden, savory dish deliberately crafted to keep everyone safe, chock full of garlic-producing comfort instead of deadly concoctions. It turned out the most deadly threat was just a tale told by drunken traders at the corner markets of Memphis. The heavy atmosphere was lifted as all chewed through their bowls, feeling alive and free while swearing off overly dramatic feasts, at least until the season of figs. So remember, next time you're at a mysterious gathering, don't be afraid of the garlic stew. Instead, worry about the company you keep, because sometimes laughter can indeed be your most potent remedy. Cue the dramatic music. The year, approximately 2500 BC. The place, the sun-drenched sands of ancient Egypt, where eating an onion might just get you roasted, and I don't mean in the oven. The aroma, a potent medley of sun-baked clay, ancient fish markets, and a hint of desperation as we delve into a culinary crisis that could make even the wisest of priests throw up their hands in exasperation. Enter Pharaoh Djoser, the big cheese of the Third Dynasty, a man as revered as he was absolutely convinced he had the Midas touch. Tonight's lavish banquet? Well, it featured the edible wonder that was a bulging plate of onions, because nothing says divine ruler quite like a heaping helping of pungent bulbs that could clear a room faster than a rabid jackal. In theory, a grand offering from the Nile's fertile banks. In practice, a recipe for a royal drama that even Shakespeare couldn't fathom. See, ancient Egyptians did not view onions merely as food. Oh no, they came laden with mystical significance. To them, these tall, stinky veggies were sacred symbols of eternity thanks to their layered design, leading priests to mull the notion that the pharaoh himself could sprout a new set of taste buds in the afterlife. After all, who wouldn't want pungent onions in their buffet of the damned? Now picture this, a grand hall with polished stone floors that echo each gasp of the audience. Frenzied murmurs complement the sound of clinking jewelry as the high-ranking nobles sit, fanning themselves nervously under the weight of their ceremonial headpieces. The table groans under the weight of roasted meats, succulent figs, and of course an overzealous display of the all-important onions. The tension begins to simmer as the Grand Vizier, a man whose resemblance to a startled chicken would inspire fear in any hungry crowd, presents the dish to the pharaoh. But wait, what's this? Someone in the back, a lowly scribe with dreams of linear hieroglyphs, has just revealed that the onions in question were recently imported from a rival city, notorious for their tendency to sprout unusually aggressive curses. Cue an immediate game of social chess as blood drains from nobles' faces faster than a mangled royal decree. They might have been gods on earth, but in front of a plate of potentially cursed onions, they were as useless as a broken chariot. As panic washes over the guests like a wave of Nile floods, Djoser attempts to maintain his composure. "I have tasted onions before. I'm practically a connoisseur," he bellows, while desperately waving off the warnings of doom in the form of hand gestures reminiscent of a windmill in a tempest. It's too late. The atmosphere is electric, thick with suspicion and the scent of looming regret. Every noble can already envision themselves shunned from the afterlife by a terribly vengeful onion spirit named Ani. Then, in the midst of the chaos, the high priestess suddenly gasps, clutching her amulet. She declares that the onions must be blessed first. Otherwise, the pharaoh's taste buds could end up cursed for eternity. Hilarity ensues as the grand banqueting hall descends into madness. Rabbits are dragged in. Spices are tossed like confetti, and a very confused herd of goats is led in as sacrificial candidates. Because nothing represents a proper ambiguity of life and death like preparing goats over a mere plate of onions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of fruitless sacrifice attempting to appease a non-existent onion overlord, Djoser, with all the fervor of a man trying to outrun disapproving memes, finally shoves one of those onions down his royal throat. The court gasps. Surely, the pharaoh's dedication to an onion could make or break an ancient Egyptian dynasty. Lo and behold, he chews with a vigor that suggests he's chomping down on pure glory. Tension dissipates as the crowd collectively exhales. They were saved by the sheer willpower of a man and a thirsty onion. Let it be known that their fears were what lay beneath the layers, not the curses themselves. And did he get punished? No. He became one of the most famed pharaohs known forever for his indiscriminate love of all things oniony. So what did we learn here? In life, don't underestimate the power of a well-placed vegetable. May your conquests be many. But remember always, when in doubt, just chew through the garlic. Often, that's the only thing standing between you and eternal regret. Why did the ancient Egyptians worship garlic? You're about to find out. Picture this. The year is 274 BC, and you're standing amidst towering pyramids, sweat trickling from your brow in the unforgiving sun. The air is thick with the pungent mixture of sand, sweat, and something suspiciously like a Mediterranean delicacy, garlic. At the center of this ancient world is a bustling market, where merchants shout proclamations of garlic's miraculous health benefits, claiming it wards off evil spirits, bad breath, and occasionally rabid cats. As the sun casts long shadows across the dusty streets, a curious throng gathers around an extravagant stall bedecked in colorful papyrus advertising scrolls. Deliciously rogue merchants promising a taste of garlic that commands attention. Enter our protagonist, Pepe the peasant, whose momentous journey to culinary enlightenment finds him interrupting the local garlic overlord, a rotund figure known as Aspirin the Allium. Shiny like the glistening pyramids, Aspirin leans heavily over the stall, over-enthusiastically extolling the virtues of his garlic-infused wares, flanked by two followers who are very clearly here only for the free samples. "Garlic," Aspirin bellows. "The secret to immortality. The cure for everything from earthworm invasions to viral outbreaks on livestock. No one can resist its virtues." The atmosphere crackles, and the air quickly thickens with a whiff of something almost intoxicating. Not the sweet scent of fresh bread baking or honeyed pastries, but an aroma best described as strangely familiar yet utterly terrifying. Pungent garlic wafts around while locals try to maintain a polite facade despite their eyes watering. But as with any step of historical fables, they suspect there's something more sinister at work. A secret society of garlic enthusiasts, known ominously as the Order of the Allium, believes garlic to be godly, a sacrament of sorts that could make or break their standing in society. They gather each week under the cover of the Sphinx, swapping tales and fraudulently bless assorted dishes. And yet, none of them can remain within 10 feet of each other without needing to sacrifice a goat simply for fresh air. Tensions rise when Pepe, tired of the overpriced garlic skewers that ruined his best toga, proposes a garlic-free dish, a savory lentil stew. Chaos ensues. Merchants abandon their stalls, fainting at the thought of such sacrilege. Bystanders clutch their garlic roots, yelling, "Heretic!" and "You'll bring down the wrath of the gods." Aspirin's bulging eyes roll back as he clutches his garlic bracelets, calling upon the force of 1,000 cloves to subdue the uproar. Pepe, however, loses his head, simply to save his taste buds, under a barrage of pungent protest and bursts into laughter, while his new lentil stew returns outrageous chants like "garlic" or "die," echoing through the marketplace. Little does he know, the punishment for garlic heresy in the eyes of the Order of the Allium can involve more than just virtual tomatoes. It could very well include actual stoning involving garlic bulbs. Finally, just when it seems our garlic-free hero will be dragged away to taste suppression, the town oracle stumbles through the mob, accidentally stepping on a clove, slipping dramatically as she falls into a coma that leaves everyone horrified but eerily silent. As the ancient custom demands, they must prophesy from her, and all she manages to mutter is, "Not so fragrant." The crowd pauses, many recalling that their mum's lentil stew didn't involve any garlic at all, leading them to question everything. As the sun sets over Egypt, Pepe walks away, not in chains, but as the reluctant hero of the day, sworn to keep a close eye on these garlic zealots, while he secretly marinates his lentils on the sly against the ensuing culinary whirlwind. Remember, fellow time travelers, there's always room for garlic, as long as you eat it while ensuring you don't end up with a cult trying to take your taste buds away. So, the lesson here? No matter how small, never underestimate the power of a lentil stew, and more importantly, the ability of garlic to whirl people into a frenzy. Welcome to 1200 BCE, where the Nile flows like a rich, ancient artery feeding the heart of civilization, and garlic is worshipped like a divine elixir. The sun beats down relentlessly on a bustling marketplace in Thebes, and there's an unmistakable aroma, part spices, part sweat, with just a hint of something that could either be heaven or the afterlife of a very unfortunate crocodile. In the midst of this chaos, we find our key players. Pharaoh Tutankhamun's Kandor-challenged advisor, Hekek, a man whose entire existence revolves around deciphering the cryptic snickers of a court filled with ambitious servants. For him, today is monumental. He must present the pharaoh with a feast to celebrate his latest triumph over, well, the nearest pang of hunger. Today's meal is none other than the humble garlic, a bulb so revered that treating it poorly could spark whispers of treason. Picture it. Hekek stands before a platter brimming with raw garlic, the kind of aroma that could wake the mummified dead and offend even the toughest of pharaohs. The sun casts dramatic shadows, and the air is thick with the sounds of haggling, distant singing, and the occasional clatter of an unwitting vendor spilling a barrel of honey. All eyes are on the garlic now. It's a food that's both loved and loathed. The poor cooks have tipped over pots of sun-dried fish and flatbreads out of sheer panic about how the pharaoh would react to the potent bulb. Did they add too much? Too little? Is this the beginning of one of the most catastrophic royal feasts in history? As Hekek delivers his speech proposing garlic as the cure-all for everything from boredom to a bad complexion, whispers flutter through the court. There are suspicions that the last garlic dish served made the pharaoh's grip on reality loosen ever so slightly. The peasants had eyeballs rolling at dinner as if it were performance art. Superstitions abound. Had those foul-smelling bulbs become sentient? Were they the unholy spawn of an ancient curse? Tension hilariously builds as a soothsayer who once predicted a missed birth of a lamb is now, remarkably, sure that garlic could commune with the afterlife, promising it could taste either divine or disastrous. Meanwhile, An overzealous royal guardsman is keen to taste as well, because it is speculated more than once that the after-dinner entertainment could quickly turn into a dragon-sized diplomatic incident. The moment arrives. Collectively, the entire court holds their breath as the pharaoh reaches for a globe of garlic, staring into it as if it held the damnation of Egypt within its layers. Should he bite, or take a detour to his favorite fig paste? This is it, the moment that could see his empire flourish or fall into culinary chaos. And then it happens. He bites, and the world stops. Shockwaves ripple. Hekek rises like a panicking phoenix. The guards exchange wide-eyed glances, and a so-called herbalist starts scribbling down reaction requirements for a possible exorcism, just in case. And then, miraculously, a smile tugs at the corners of the pharaoh's mouth. A hushed silence fills the hall. Did favor return? Did garlic taste different this week? Alas, it's splendid, he exclaims, nearly toppling over, but recovering just in time to break into a chorus of laughter. The sheer absurdity of the moment, the sheer tension that garlic created, dissolved in one bite. It would seem fate was capricious, and the pharaoh had made peace with his most feared vegetable. The courtiers, now relieved or possibly in disbelief, all jumped in to partake, forming a garlic-loathing cult right there in the royal palace. They chewed, they laughed, they trembled as they realized their discussions of garlic's mystical powers were now mere anecdotal humor. Thus, garlic went from kitchen extravagance to a dietary staple, with one bite of hubris turning an evening into edible history. And so we conclude, dear viewers, what have we learned? Garlic. It spices up life, and if it doesn't kill you, it might become your best friend, especially when cooking for an all-powerful autocrat. Gather round, dear viewers, as we take a preposterous plunge into the banks of the Nile around 1500 BCE, where the air is thick with the smell of mud, mystery, and the unmistakable scent of fish that has seen better days. Yes, it's time for a dinner party to remember, and wish you could unremember. The scene is set in a mud brick villa with walls that have likely witnessed an unholy amount of drama. Sunlight filters through palm fronds, casting intricate shadows across the gathering that would make an Instagram filter jealous, and the sounds of laughter are punctuated by the spiritual hum of local mosquitoes composing a symphony, suitable for a horror film, of course. At the center of the table lies the culinary nightmare, a platter of Nile fish. Now, this is not your average fillet. This is an ancient affair where freshness is a concept as foreign as personal hygiene. Clad in elaborate linen robes, we meet our key players. Neferet, a high priestess who dabbles in questionable herbal remedies. Hatshepsut, a pharaoh disguised as an eager dinner guest. And a rather overzealous fisherman named Khufu, who's obligated to try and impress them both, with his catch of the day from the Nile itself. The atmosphere shifts quickly as Khufu proudly presents the fish. It glistens ominously in the sunlight, a wink of moisture that hints at its still-living relatives lurking in the murky depths, plotting revenge. The tension mounts as he launches into an elaborate monologue about the many virtues of Nile fish. Rich in flavor, packed with nutrients, incredibly susceptible to foodborne illnesses. The guests nod enthusiastically, a chorus of enthusiastic trepidation. Next comes the absurd ritual of the finger dip, a culinary tradition where you test the appetite by literally dipping your finger into a mystery sauce that is supposed to brighten the fish's flavor. Spoiler: it's as pleasant as sticking your digit in a vat of stagnant swamp water. With that, Neferet fakes a cough that echoes through the villa, undoubtedly caused by a fish scale that has taken the liberty of lodging itself in her throat. To make matters worse, Hatshepsut suspects Neferet could be on to a fishy conspiracy pun intended, which leads to a twitch of apprehension in her royal brow. Perhaps dinner is not just dinner after all. In the midst of rapid-fire awkwardness, rumors start floating around the table. A sage offers a toast, only to be immediately struck by a wave of paranoia. Could this fish have a dark past? Was it a spy in the previous life? Perhaps it was a spy in this life, and the rancid oil decorating the dish has turned it into a weapon of the people. The guests start giggling nervously as they engage in what can only be described as an in-depth conversation about fish folklore, which frankly sounds more damning than any royal edict against cooking, creaking sofa surfers. As the moment of truth approaches, someone suggests the fish be presented to the gods first, with enough incense to fill an Olympic swimming pool. The smell escalates in a nightmare of burnt offerings. The cat is not impressed. The inhabitants of the Nile are collectively rolling in their aquatic graves, and the fish, quite obliviously, awaits its fate amongst murmurs of concern. Finally, it's time to sample the culinary centerpiece. Everyone takes a daring bite while simultaneously praying to Horus for stomach safety. And wouldn't you know it, the fish was actually delicious. Turns out, all the dread and paranoia stemmed from an outrageous overestimation of its potential dangers. Kind of like expecting a regular fast food burger to be laced with exotic drugs. In a twist befitting a dinner table gossip session, Neferet declares, after a brief internal struggle that has resulted in her intensifying leap from priestess to food taster, that perhaps they should include Nile fish in future sacrificial offerings. Cue the collective sigh of relief and loud clamoring to reorder dinner. And so we learn that sometimes the fish you fear is just a poorly cooked tail at the heart of civilization's dinner table. But don't get too enthused. Just remember to eat carefully. After all, one man's dinner is a god's nightmare. In the end, it seems the moral remains. If life gives you fish, throw it back, unless you're at a royal dinner. Picture this: ancient Egypt, circa 2500 BC, where the sun gleams off the pyramids like the perfect Instagram filter, and the Nile smells faintly of fish and something else. You stroll into a banquet hall filled with high-ranking nobles who each possess enough bling to outshine the evening star. The sound of a lyre plays lightly. Laughter and chatter fill the air except for one deadly silence. Oversized platters of food are laid out, perfectly arranged, with one particularly aromatic item stealing the show: a heaping mound of garlic-laden falafel, the absolute delight to the senses, and an evening's ticket to intrigue and mortification. But wait, what's that? A dubious, narrow-eyed food taster with an unfortunate name, we'll call him Sneezy McOgre, approaches the banquet table, his worried fingers trembling over the garlicky treasure. Welcome to a culinary combat zone. The Egyptian dining table, where appetizers are not merely staples, they are passive-aggressive measures wrapped in layers of fluff and spices. Garlic, revered by ancient Egyptians for both its nutritional and, mystical properties, was also considered a potent weapon in everyday life. Why? Because a well-placed clove could ruin any social gathering and take a few lives, maybe even your own. See, during these elite dinners, the odds of being poisoned by rival courtiers hovered somewhere between high, and you might want to rethink those invitations. Serving the wrong dish could lead to a full-blown crisis, an emergency meeting of priests discussing your demise because someone decided to get fancy with the olive oil. Our young culinary hero, Sneezy McCoger, has been sweating profusely, possibly due to the miasmic atmosphere or the overwhelming weight of his self-sabotaging career. Today, he's tasked with tasting the garlicky falafel, a dish neither emperor nor mortal should underestimate. Between paranoid glances from the seated nobles, he braves a small bite while muttering ancient recipes that sound ominously like incantations. Watching him is a colorful cast of characters. The high priest with resurrection plans for the next life. The jealous prince who once lost a duel to a homemade hummus, and an ambitious maiden whose ambition rivals that of Cleopatra herself. Each one eyes Sneezy closely, their collective anticipation resembling that of a sitcom audience waiting for a comedic punchline. With a twitch from Sneezy's eye leading to an exaggerated gasp, the room freezes. He leans back, jaw dropping so low it could scoop grains from the floor. Is it culinary ecstasy? Or simply a creamy curse? The guests swarm around him with bated breath and sharp utensils. What will it be? Suddenly, Sneezy's eyes roll back, and with a dramatic flourish, he collapses into an ancient bowl of lentils. Chaos ensues as people scream faster than mesquite smoke at a BBQ. Hands flail, guards dither, and someone tries to offer him water despite it being clearly too late for hydration. The high priest, sensing the perfect opportunity for a prophetic soliloquy, raises his arms in invocational despair and cries, "Alas! Too much garlic has strangled our dear taste tester." And then, the twist. With dramatic flair, Sneezy pops back up, wiping his mouth, chuckling like a just risen from the dead, which, considering their obsession with mummies, was not exactly a hard hobby to pick up. Ah, the best falafel in the realm, I declare. May the gods hail its garlicy glory. Cue the collective sigh of relief, followed by a spontaneous dance circle for the dining crowd, reminiscent of a high school prom gone delightful. Sneezy the Slayer becomes a local legend, and the garlic falafel goes on to star in 10 subsequent banquets. Meanwhile, Egyptian hygiene standards instinctively contemplate annual evaluations of culinary safety. The unspoken moral is clear. Garlic might be a godsend, but when it comes to marginally trained food tasters, all bets are off. So what's the takeaway from this historical sitcom? Always expect a plot twist at the dining table, and if you're to taste something lethal, let's hope it's just a food coma, not a body in a sarcophagus. Scenes of ancient Egypt flash upon the screen. Golden sand giving way to a bustling marketplace where the smell of ripe olives dances with that of badly aged fish. The year is 1200 BCE, and the excitement in the air could be sliced with a particularly large bread knife. Welcome to Heliopolis, where time is measured not just by the sun, but also by the relentless pursuit of the perfect onion. Enter Pharaoh Ramses II, the tallest man in the room, or at least he was last week before he decided to try a new herbal tea that everyone warned him about. Wearing a headdress that looked as if a peacock had exploded on his head, he is flanked by priests chanting something that sounds suspiciously like a recipe for falafel. Today's culinary focus? The grand opening of the first ever Festival of the Onion. Yes, you heard that right. In the grand scheme of ancient Egyptian wisdom, the humble onion was considered not just a food, but a sacred gift from the gods. It was said that eating onions gave one an aura so divine that even the Egyptians' cats would stop pretending to ignore them. The festival kicks off with everything onion-related. Onion pies, onion wines, onion pies stuffed with more onions, and pretty much onion everything. The aroma of charred alliums fills the air, mingling with chants of reverence. But amidst the laughter and feasting lies an anxious tension, as Ramses prepares to make an announcement regarding a peculiar death day, a culinary mystery that has kept the courtiers awake for countless nights. You see, this year's onions, grown by the sacred Nile, have an unsettlingly bitter quality. To the untrained palate, they were only just fit for a peasant stew, but to Ramses and his gourmands, it was a matter of national pride, or garden variety doom. As the priests continue their incantations, one intrepid taster, Ignatius the overly optimistic, the man whose title is every PR person's nightmare, is summoned to take the first bite of the sacred onion. With a flourish of drama akin to a reality show reveal, he lifts an onion the size of a toddler, shouted at by those watching. To taste is to live. Ignatius takes a heroic nib, and what follows resembles a slow-motion horror film. Eyes bulging, he gags, flails, and then spews forth the contents of his stomach, concluding the aroma of onion now infuses the square that was previously filled with light-hearted chaos. Peasants scream, the musicians stop mid-jam, and even the cats take a rare moment to observe as chaos erupts. The priests, presumably masters of culinary prophecies, begin pointing fingers like a game of ancient chess gone awry. "It was the harvest," roars one priest, pointing at the ground with fervor usually reserved for a lost dog. Or perhaps it was the new moon, proposes another with the kind of passion one usually reserves for grilled cheese. Paranoia sets in. Was this a plot by the neighboring kingdom? A ploy by the olives to sabotage their rivals? Had the garlic finally decided to rebel? The crowd whispers tales of treachery, citing everything from curses from vengeful spirits to underwhelming parenting. Finally, in a cringeworthy twist of irony, Ramses, the pharaoh known for his colossal statues, rock-hard abs, and unyielding power, turns pale. He had recently declared to his advisors that he'd felt more like a lightly sautéed onion rather than the divine being he was born to be. The conclusion: days later, as the pharaoh wears his crown a little askew, and as he learns that the bitterness was simply due to a new strain of onions believed to have been crossbred with turnips, peace returns. Ramses chuckles as transcendent humor of an ancient populace settles. The real curse was poor onion knowledge passed through the divine grapevine, or, in this case, the divine vegetable strain. And so, in true ancient Egyptian spirit, they celebrated the victory of knowledge over ignorance with an encore of dishes mostly sans onions. So let's take a lasting lesson from this chaotic onion affair. Never underestimate the power of a root vegetable, especially one that comes with a side of potential political scandal. Welcome to ancient Egypt, circa 2500 BCE, where the pyramids are glinting in the midday sun and optimism is running as high as the Nile. Picture this. You're sitting at a lavish banquet table that could easily accommodate a family of 4, but for tonight, it's hosting an ancient gastronomic horror show that's likely to confuse your stomach and possibly endanger your life. The lighting, flickering oil lamps casting dramatic shadows that make you look even more like a hapless sacrificial lamb than usual. The air is thick with the sweet-sour scent of something that might have been a fish 3 days ago, mixed with an assortment of exotic spices that, let's be real, seem less like a culinary choice and more like a confusion of a toddler in a herb shop. As harpists strum their melancholic tunes, you can almost feel the tensions brewing. Is the meal about to invite divine blessings or smack a curse on the entire guest list? Enter the pharaoh, complete with a headpiece that's got enough gold to fund a small revolution. He raises his golden goblet filled with something left over from last week's lecture on expected beverages. Tonight we dine in the company of the gods, he proclaims with a flourish that would make a Vegas magician jealous. The starter? A heap of raw fish marinated in a sauce whose recipe requires an ancient scroll, several dubious replications, and a very brave cook. Will it be a feast fit for the gods, or an intricate game of culinary Russian roulette? Part of dining in ancient Egypt is the ceremonial serving. The kitchen crews are multitasking chefs and politicians, bound to culinary perfection while risking their necks for any mishap. Each course arrives under the watchful eyes of a designated food taster whose job is apparently to volunteer as the canary in the coal mine. This brave individual receives every dish served and takes the first bite. But he's no mouth breather. He's got a sacred duty to distinguish good honey from a poison quicker than you can say mummy's curse. But hold your horses. When the fish platter arrives, it's like being handed a live grenade. The tension in the room thickens. Will the pharaoh choke on a bone? Could it be contaminated by the spirits of disgruntled ancient chefs? Is the fish indeed 3 days old or merely 3 years of bad luck? The guests look on anxiously, each spoon poised, wondering if they should pray or just hold their breath for the impending drama. As the pharaoh takes the fateful first bite, time seems to pause. The court holds its collective breath, each soul praying to the gods of good taste for mercy. Then, a crinkle of the pharaoh's nose. Is it delight or tragedy? A nearby scribe drops his tablet, fearing a sudden scribe urgency, and just when you think it might be a disaster, the pharaoh smiles and declares it a bold culinary statement. Chaos momentarily dissipates into a collective sigh of relief. The only thing being sacrificed that night is their dignity. As laughter erupts, the taster realizes his life isn't in danger, and his fate is sealed. How's that for a career move? And as the rest of the dishes are served in a joyous celebration of flavor and trust building, except nobody's touching that fish. Well, who knew the secret to surviving dinner with a pharaoh involves a strong stomach, a love for unexpected flavors, and a prayer or two to deities not entirely convinced of humanity's culinary judgment. Lesson learned: dining in ancient Egypt was a high-stakes culinary theater where every course was an audition for both a crown and a grave. Always know which fish is fresh, unless you're ready to swim with the mummies. Cue dramatic music. The year, somewhere around 2500 BC, and the setting, a bustling marketplace near the banks of the Nile, where exotic sounds of barter mix with the invigorating aroma of— is that rotting cabbage? Yes, that's right. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the latest fashion is a linen wrap, and the unaired reality show What's That Smell features lead actors such as Foul Fish and Mystery Meat. In the crowd, we find Imhotep, a young architect with dreams of greatness, balancing a tray loaded with the finest Egyptian delicacies. The centerpiece of his feast? A bowl of lettuce. Yes, lettuce. But not your garden variety leaf. This lettuce is reportedly a sacred offering to Osiris, the god of agriculture and the eternal afterlife. Let's hope he appreciates the cryptic cult of crunchy greens. The air is dense with the humid warmth of the Nile, mingling with spices, the occasional waft of a baked sacrificial offering, and the faint stench of dubious fish. Vendors shout melodically about their wares, horns blare, while birds lament the concept of vegetarianism. Amidst this culinary cacophony, we see Imhotep making a dubious choice. Lettuce, a plant believed to be blessed due to its association with fertility. Ah yes, because nothing says a good time like risking a backstory in horticulture. Yet, tension mounts as Imhotep ventures deeper into the crowd, dodging a horde of overzealous merchants hawking their wares with the fervor typically reserved for Olympic athletes. One overly enthusiastic vendor, wearing a significant amount of kohl eyeliner and an elaborate headdress, hawks a different green VIP, very important plant, the hieroglyphically endorsed nettle, claiming it can cure everything from the sniffles to existential dread. In the midst of the chaos, whispers of superstition flutter through the air like pollen. "Beware the curse of the pharaoh," warns one bemused woman with an armful of figs. "If you dare munch on the godly greens without appropriate offering to Ra, you might find yourself cursed with flatulence for eternity." Ah yes, nothing like a touch of scatological horror to enhance a meal. As Imhotep stares worriedly at the gawking crowd, he starts to wonder, what's worse? A dangerous curse or possibly weaponized lettuce? Just as he finally secures his serving of sacred greens, the religious leaders make their entrance, led by an overly dramatic priest whose robe may or may not have been influenced by a tectonic geological disaster of mismatched fabrics. He declares loudly that the lettuce is an offering to the gods and ideally should never see the light of day on a commoner's plate. "The pharaoh's honor must be upheld," he howls, brandishing a staff adorned with everything from hieroglyphics to what seems suspiciously like a rotting goat head. Caught in an unlucky twist of fate, Imhotep suddenly faces a crushing decision. Does he risk the ire of the gods and eat the sacrilegious lettuce, or does he leave it behind, shielding himself from divine retribution but provoking the violent wrath of the local lettuce gang? It's a dilemma worthy of a Nile-laden drama. To alleviate his pangs of hunger versus fear, Imhotep decides to embrace chaos and takes a large bite of the very lettuce that could spark a holy war, or some very unpleasant tummy aches. The crowd gasps, a collective intake of breath powerful enough to birth a dozen more ancient curses. But wait, instead of a thunderous clap from the heavens, a flock of ducks spontaneously cheer and begin to waddle towards him, quacking with approval, as if they have just witnessed the resurrection of the god of offbeat culinary advancements. Turns out, this whole lettuce-driven fiasco brought the community together, as the ducks were part of an ancient Egyptian loyalty program focused on blessing the culinary adventures of brave souls. Who knew? The priest turns crimson, while others present shrug, cackling about the absurdity that led to this unexpected gastronomical alliance. Oh, ancient Egypt, where the legacy of lettuce becomes the highlight of the day as the ducks prepare themselves for a feast of their own, surrounded by delighted onlookers. What did we learn? When negotiating a culinary endeavor in ancient Egypt, always check the fine print on godly food, and if in doubt, maybe offer an extra grain to liven up the appetizer. Or just let the ducks handle it. They seem to know a thing or two about keeping curses at bay. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where the pyramids touch the sky, and your breakfast is a sweet offering to Ra, the sun god. It's toasted in the year 2540 BC, and trust us, you wouldn't last a day here unless you thrive on a daily dosage of incompetence and half-baked pastries. Picture this: a bustling bakery at the foot of a grand pyramid, sunlight beaming down like God's spotlight. The air is thick with the smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the unmistakable aroma of sun-baked sweat and the occasional whiff of decomposing dung, but that's just the market ambiance. The sounds? A chaotic symphony of bakers arguing over yeast, priests chanting awkwardly about grain offerings, and a pet cat named Bastet attempting to yawn majestically. Here comes our key character, Ankh-Sen-Amun, the town baker whose ambition to win the coveted title of best bread in Thebes has propelled him into a world of culinary chaos. Today, he's whipping up the most elaborate loaf to grace this side of the Nile, while nervously eyeing the silhouette of a looming pyramid that may or may not have been built with a slight miscalculation. Who needs tilt indicators when you have divine purpose, right? But what's a grand pyramid scheme without some core food-related tension? Our baker is convinced that the secret to success lies in his giant batch of bread, rumored to be blessed by Anubis, the rather stern god of the afterlife. There's just one tiny problem. Rumor has it that Anubis has also been known to curse bad bread with a side of eternal unrest. And, let's be real, these Egyptians took their bread seriously, akin to a modern-day artisanal feud. Gluten-free diets or not, there would be consequences. With kneading fists raised high, Ankh-Sen-Amun begins his ritualistic bread-making, following not just the traditional recipes, but also some slightly dubious local superstition. Eggs need to be cracked open while reciting the names of his ancestors, because nothing says "I love you, Grandma" like rolling dough in the vicinity of her ghost. Dagger-clad priests circulate the area, whispering gematria while strategically placing salted fish and saffron nearby as offerings to dodge any ominous vibes usually aimed at poorly baked goods. As the crowd gathers, the tension rises. Children scrunch their noses in disbelief at Ankh-Sen-Amun's elaborate dough creation, while the village's cranky camel seems to decide today is the day he'll have a philosophical debate about prosperity and fluffiness, murmuring incoherently by the well. Dismissing the camel's wisdom, a random chicken parades by, forcing its way through the crowd, an unintended omen making the villagers speculate on the nature of this bread. Will it soar to glorious heights or collapse into despair like the pyramid half finished? Finally, after intense kneading, incantation, and an enormous glass of Nile water because sanitation is for wimps, the bread emerges. A golden, towering masterpiece that Ankh-Sen-Amun believes will dethrone the current champion, only to have the high priest deem it a tasty sacrilege after discovering Ankh-Sen-Amun's minor betrayal involving an old, moldy carryover from last week's bake-off. In a twist of humorous fate, he watches as, during the grand unveiling, the massive loaf promptly lands on the head of a visiting dignitary, sparking an international incident that threatens to shatter trade relationships with neighboring tribes. Thus, one bread loomed over the future of diplomacy. So much for culinary fame. Meanwhile, Ankh-Sen-Amun's reputation plummeted faster than a pyramid worker from a missed safety point. Moral of the story? Never trust a bread that comes with a side of political drama. Always ensure your recipes pass an inspection, and avoid animals who show an interest in your baked goods. Because in the end, rise with the dough or face the wrath of the Nile's most vengeful food critics. Picture this. The year is 500 BCE, and it's lunchtime in the ancient city of Thebes, a place so swamped in sand and mystery, the sheer number of inscriptions on the walls could fuel years of family therapy. Bursting with pyramids, papyrus, and people with gold on everything except their flip-flops because, it's ancient Egypt. The atmosphere is vibrant, chaotic, and rich with the aroma of spices that would make your taste buds scream, "Is it my turn to get cursed today?" Enter our main character, Baif, a lowly peasant who probably spent too much time squabbling with the neighbors over goat ownership and not enough time considering the potential perils of lunch. Today's feast features a simple yet troubled dish, lentil stew garnished with a sprinkle of, hold on to your ankh, crushed dung beetles. Why, you might ask? Because apparently in ancient Egypt, suffering through a meal could be seen as a spiritual cleanse, or just a way to keep the gods entertained. Now, imagine the sounds, a cacophony of buzzards circling overhead, mixed with the haunting calls of food sellers hawking yesterday's bread and the occasional battle cry of a disgruntled servant trying to keep a straight face as he serves the pile of questionable protein in front of beef. Everything in the bustling marketplace is drenched in the sense of incense, sweat, and a peculiar hint of impending doom that hangs heavy like a hand-rubbed container of mummified ambitions. As Beef dives into his lunch, the tension in the air escalates. You see, the ancient Egyptians had this little superstition. Food wasn't just food. It was imbued with the spirits of the dead. Thus, consuming a meal could spiral into an imaginative horror story quicker than you can say Osiris. They believed that if you displeased the gods while eating, you wouldn't just get a stomachache. You could instantly transform into your mother-in-law's nagging voice in your ear for eternity. Yes, eternal torment wrapped in familial sarcasm. How delightful. Imagine the feasting frenzy. Baif feels a tickle of unease as he glances around the table to see his fellow eaters slowly turning green. Not out of envy, but from the realization that they may have united common grievances with their chefs. A sudden panic grips the table as word spreads of a rival clan's ill-fated lentil recipe touted as being blessed by the local astrologer, thereby suspected to have summoned not only divine wrath, but also a mild case of colitis among the populace. There, between bites, whispers of curses exchanged like currency, as if every errant bite could trigger an impromptu judgment day brought forth by food gone wrong. Enter the high priest, clad more in repulsion than robes, sesame oil for shampoo and all, who bursts onto the scene like a melodramatic soap opera character, yelling about the necessity of sacrificing a chicken to appease the gods who might still be sulking over last week's dinner performance. Naturally, this leads to a chaotic scramble to find a live chicken among cackling vendors peddling for their lives. Finally, all's well that ends well for Baif. After a ritualistic chicken sacrifice that surprisingly becomes the post-luncheon entertainment, an impromptu game of who can hold their lunch longest ensues, showcasing everyone's questionable decision-making skills. Turns out, the crusty lentil stew, predictably a little more beetly than usual, just needed a little more cumin, which upon query was being hoarded by a particularly cranky pharaoh who preferred his food dangerously gastronomic. And the moral here? In ancient Egypt, meals could either skyrocket you to heavenly satisfaction or hit you with a saucy curse and a side of premature adulthood. So, next time you're at a dinner party, perhaps stick to pastries. Sugar might just spare you the godly wrath of a rebuked beetle. Picture it. Egypt, circa 2500 BC. The sun is blazing overhead, casting shadows longer than a pyramid scheme's list of beneficiaries. Enter the bustling marketplace, filled with a cacophony of shouts, wheezing camels, and the sweet aroma of spices mingled with the unmistakable scent of something not fit for human consumption. Amidst the chaos stands a humble street vendor, a man with a questionable mustache and a larger questionable grin. What does he have for you? A sandwich, but not just any sandwich. This is ancient Egypt's take on the culinary abomination we call the bread between two pieces of bread, or as the Egyptians fondly referred to it, a tomb on the go. The sandwich is monumental. It's stacked catastrophically high with ingredients the likes of which would give even the most adventurous food blogger a case of the heebie-jeebies. Think flatbread, slathered in oils from locals who forgot what hygiene meant, layered with pickled vegetables that are just as likely to bite you back. A delightful mix of leeks, onions, and possibly some family curses. The atmosphere is thick with tension, because while you're considering lunch, every passerby is convinced that today could be the day they choke on a shard of broken history, or a piece of rock-hard bread. You can hear the faint cries of merchants hawking their wares, sweets, spices, and skeptical eyewitness accounts of the latest pharaoh's haircut. Now, hold on to your papyrus because things are about to get absurdly convoluted. In ancient Egypt, sandwiches weren't just a meal. They were a vessel for superstition. The pharaoh believed that what you ate could directly influence your afterlife, and that's why they sprinkled various charms into their sandwiches like ancient shakers of questionable provenance. Who doesn't enjoy a little cursed memory alongside their falafel? As you take a cautious bite, the local food critic, a rather snobby cat with a collar reading Royal Taster, stares at you with judgment so sharp it could cut through the stale air. Meanwhile, the crowd holds its breath. If you survive, they might just declare you the new ruler of the Sandwich Kingdom. Tension mounts as you encounter an odd crunch. Could it be the shard of glass left in from last week's tomb raiding? Or perhaps a miniature pyramid that got lost in translation? Just then, the inevitable twist strikes. You discover the crunch was merely a rogue piece of a bitter herb called failure. Decisions made yesterday haunting you like a ghost of bad cuisine past. Turns out, this concoction is not just a meal but a test of survival, and the sandwich is winning. With each morsel, the crowd edges closer, each munch amplifying the veneration that surrounds the street vendor. Your fate hangs on the next bite. Will you ascend to become the new culinary messiah, or descend into the annals of snack time failure? The spell is broken when the vendor shouts out, "Step right up! This sandwich won't bury you in predestined doom, I promise." In an unexpected twist, you find that, with the power of good marketing and a solid pitch, none of the terrors actually translate to edibility, provided you can ignore the mild nausea that lingers like a perplexed afterthought. And who needs a formal history lesson on royal dining when you have a street vendor willing to sell you something with more drama than a summer blockbuster? So what have we learned today? Sandwiches might just be the ancient Egyptians' form of modern art, messy, confusing, and open to interpretation. Bon appétit? Or should I say, bon appétit? Cue the dramatic music. The year, somewhere around 1500 BCE. The setting, an opulent dining chamber filled with enough gold to make any modern decorator faint in horror. The air? A rich concoction of incense, exotic spices, and underneath it all, a lingering aroma that could only be described as suspiciously garlicky. Enter Akhenaten, pharaoh extraordinaire and revolutionary thinker, standing beside a dining table the size of a yacht, littered with dishes arranged in a bizarre pyramid. Here's the kicker. 300 slaves, servants, and a band of clueless diplomats are all witnessing this culinary circus, praying to their deities that they don't get invited to eat. What's on the menu? Well, besides the faint chance of watery fish served by a trembling cook, there's one particularly infamous dish. The infamous garlic hummus. Rumor had it that if you dared serve garlic in any form to a pharaoh, it could lead to divine retribution, or worse, a hunger strike initiated by the angry deities. It might seem innocent enough, a little dip to complement the pita, but ancient Egyptians were grappling with some serious culinary paranoia. You see, garlic was considered a proper divine gift. It possessed healing properties, the same properties that could very well tick off the gods if misused. It was a double-edged sword wrapped in a wrinkly skin. Tension rises as the head chef, a man named Djedzefi, stood at the ready. His vitals were fluctuating between courage and everything we now define as existential dread. He held a plate of garlic hummus marinated in suspicious vibes, while Akhenaten glared like a kid who'd waited too long for his snack. As Djedzefi scooped the hummus onto an enchanted plate, the chamber hushed. A cat let out a discontent hiss. Its owner's heart raced at the thought of divine punishment. You don't just drop garlic in the presence of a pharaoh without asking for trouble. The tension was palpable as guests wondered at, would they see lightning strike the table? Would Djedzefi spontaneously combust? Or would the pharaoh unleash a million curses for even suggesting that garlic was a worthy condiment? In an absurd act of desperation, perhaps an unfathomably brave culinary stunt, Djedzefi decided to taste it himself. All eyes were upon him. He took a hefty spoonful, chewed carefully, then paused as if he just solved the riddle of the Sphinx. Seconds felt like hours. Finally, Akhenaten could no longer contain himself. "Well?" Djedzefi, holding up an incredulous thumb, managed to declare, "Artery, cleansing, vigor, inducing, a divine blend, and possibly mildly rebellious. A silence descended. Did he just dare to call garlic chic? The room held its breath. Moments later, a massive spider descended from the ceiling that had clearly been part of the decor committee. It landed on the golden table, and as whispers of paranoia sparked among the guests, Akhenaten, in a fit of miscalculated bravado, cried out, "Bring out more garlic. If the gods be angry, let them smite me." With that, his fate was sealed. The moment he uttered those words, a storm outside rumbled ominously, as if Egyptian weather took cues from royal declarations. As darkness loomed beyond the windows, and their banquet devolved into chaos. At least 3 more guests fainted at the sheer audacity of it all. But on the bright side, garlic hummus became a trend. Who knew a dash of courage could take flavor to an entirely new level? Everyone tucked in, swallowing their fears along with the hummus, while the chef basked in culinary glory, all thanks to one audacious act of rebellion against the divine. So what did we learn? In life, be bold with your culinary choices. Just remember that garlic can either cure your ailments or have everyone invoking different realms of hell. Welcome to the year 250 BCE, specifically the bustling streets of Thebes, where the atmospheric charm of the Nile is elevated by the scent of sun-dried fish and overripe figs. As the sun beats down relentlessly, the locals are engaged in the serious business of maintaining order and groove while engaging in the daily ritual of eating a fascinatingly questionable sandwich. Yes, that's right. Forget modern artisan cuisine with avocado toast. We're talking stale flatbreads housing an array of stuffed surprises, including the favored fillings of the day: ground chickpeas, mashed lentils, and an alarming amount of sand, because in ancient Egypt, nothing says gourmet like an exfoliating crunch. The streets are alive with merchants hawking their wares, as the sounds of donkeys braying and children arguing about who's the rightful heir to a couple of leftover dates fill the air, setting a scene of picturesque chaos. Aboard this culinary roller coaster are our key characters: Khufu, a humble baker whose bread is celebrated only for its utility, and Nefertari, a highly esteemed and sophisticated lady bringing her best puns with her to the market. In a world where magic, gods, and really bad hygiene coexist, these two are curious diners amidst an epic food debacle. Now, tension rises when Khufu reveals that his latest batch of sandwiches is enchanted. Or at least, that's what he claims. Apparently, he's received whispers that consuming one will grant the eater divine knowledge or at least a violent case of the runs. The onlookers gasped, forming a shadowy circle around him. Why worry about the afterlife when you can gamble with your digestive system in this one? The absurdity amplifies as Nefertari demands the secret recipe, leaning closer, convinced that if she doesn't get enlightenment, she can at least attain a bakery to rival all bakeries. Little do they know, the sandwiches are the debut of Khufu's latest culinary experiment titled Sandwichology, which supposedly uses actual sand, a nod to the grandeur of the pyramids, and a reminder of how quickly prosperity can become gritty. In her desperation, Nefertari decides to partake of the sandy treat, and just as she raises her sandwich to her mouth, a flock of doves appears, as if by some divine intervention. But are they friendly doves bringing a message from the gods? Nope. They're ancient Egypt's unappreciated restaurant critics, ready to attack anything remotely resembling decorum. As chaos erupts with flapping wings and shrieking screams, Nefertari realizes that her taste in food rivals her taste in men. Disastrous. The climax follows quickly. Upon finally taking a bite of this sandy delight, we discover that the divine knowledge is only a hefty chorus of cringeworthy puns by Khufu about bread and fate. Instead of prophecy, we get, "May your bread rise like the sun," or at least not sink like your cousin's career as a wrestler. Nefertari's face is a mix of disgust and delight, and laughter erupts as initially annoyed villagers start clamoring for more. Khufu has inadvertently made puns a currency stronger than anything found at a marketplace. The sandwiches, rather than delivering the wisdom promised, have instead united the community. Shoppers become friends, turning culinary tragedy into comic relief. And thus, the only true legacy of Khufu's culinary invention. A land where laughter and grit by literal means is as treasured as a pharaoh's tomb. But here's the moral. In the end, whether it's bread or an appetite for aspiration, sometimes you just have to embrace a little grit in your daily grind. After all, that's as close as you're ever going to come to a life lesson in the desert. In the shimmering year of 747 BC, we find ourselves in the opulent palace of Taharqa, the 25th dynasty pharaoh of Egypt and part-time master chef. Picture this. The setting is an expansive courtyard, bathed in the golden glow of an afternoon sun, as a group of ministers and nobles sweat bullets, fanning themselves with papyrus leaves, while the tantalizing aroma of ancient Egyptian cuisine wafts through the air, primarily slightly burnt bread and an unidentifiable fish stew that possibly swam a little too close to the Nile's waste outlet. Among the guests is one grand chef, a man named Khufu. No, not the pharaoh, just a very confused man who should have stayed out of the kitchen. Tonight's feast was planned to cement alliances with the Nubians, whose favorite foods included hearty grains and dubious feline meat that would put anyone off their game. To impress, Khufu was pulling out all the stops: a roasted duck adorned with chestnuts, very haute cuisine for a region that had barely figured out boiling water. As the servants scurry around, shadows bounce off the golden-hued walls, and the sound of clattering pottery reverberates like a nervous heartbeat. Every time Khufu attempts to flip a duck, it bounces, wildly chasing him around the kitchen. The air thickens with the clamor of smashed vases, flailing turkeys, and hushed whispers from the ministers who agree that he'll never live this down. The only thing nobler than a king is a good scapegoat. But Khufu, undeterred by the chaos, secretly believes that the food gods have blessed him with culinary skills akin to Michelin star chefs. Instead, the banquet table resembles a bomb site where food came to meet its untimely end. The duck is in a wrestling match with spices, the fish stew is bubbling furiously, perhaps it's becoming sentient. And in the corner, a goat keeps chewing on a decorative chair, positively unbothered by the carnage. As the clock ticks down, the tension rises. The plans for this culinary event become tangled with historical superstitions so absurd that even the most devout food critics would blanch at the thought. No less than 6 auspicious priests are summoned to ward off the plague of bad flavors, or, as they call it in culinary circles, last week's leftovers. They chant blessings while eyeing Khufu, whose anxiety-induced sweat drips like a leaky tap. Oh, divine ones, please save us from culinary disaster. They plead, revealing that a miscooked meal could lead to famine, revolt, or far worse, a loss of followers on their social media if only they had it. As the dish is finally presented to the pharaoh in a lavish ceremony rivaling the opening of an Oscar envelope, the atmosphere sizzles with anticipation. Majestic music plays, cymbals crash, and in his ultra-pompous radiance, Taharqa raises his fork poised as if it were a scepter of fate. He pierces the duck, and the collective breath of the court hangs like a wobbly chandelier. To everyone's horror, instead of tender meat, a torrent of unidentified liquid spurts from the duck in a manner reminiscent of heartbreak. The pharaoh, mid-chew of what could only be deemed rubbery muscle, cocks an eyebrow. The sudden silence is deafening, interrupted only by the goat casually munching on Khufu's apron. Then, suddenly, the unthinkable happens. A flash of revelation. Taharqa begins to laugh uproariously, his laughter echoing against the stone walls. By the gods, Khufu, this is so bad it might be a new diplomatic tactic. Laughter erupts, resonating through the courtyard as ministers realize that tonight's unexpected culinary explosion was less a disaster and more an unorthodox start to inter-kingdom negotiations. Yes, their future alliances would rest on the shoulders of unseasoned duck. As the guests leave, full of questionably good humor and dubious stomachs, one can only wonder what culinary legacy would remain of Khufu's dinner to remember. Probably something along the lines of, never eat anything that quacks back. And so, we glean from this little mishap that sometimes in history, it's not the battle of wits, but the battle of flavors. And some diplomatic conversations taste better when coupled with an ample side of laughter. Imagine it. 2500 BC, the sun blazing more fiercely than your aunt's annual barbecue, and the Nile flowing as if it had a personal vendetta against any nearby sandals. You find yourself at a grand feast in an ancient Egyptian palace, where soft piano music is replaced by the raucous laughter of nobles attempting to get a reasonable turnip recipe from a disinterested servant. All seems well until you catch a whiff of something sweet, fermented grapes, cursed wine, or the distinct scent of potential dismemberment. Welcome to the cacophonous dining experience where wine is both divine elixir and weapon of mass confusion. The atmosphere is illuminated by flickering torches battling against the oppressive heat, while servants dart around, juggling chalices overflowing with liquid temptation, their eyes darting anxiously as if trying to remember whose head they last carried on a platter. In this hour of socializing and snacking, we meet the star players. Pharaoh Hotep IX, more flamboyant than a zebra in a polka dot suit. His royal sommelier, a rather sweaty man named Nefer Hotep, who takes tasting notes more seriously than his last marriage. And Princess Semet, balancing the sharp wit of a courtroom judge with a penchant for turning her nose up at everything not gilded. Now, let's talk about the food aspect that brings us to our impending doom: the wine. It's said that the ancient Egyptians could turn anything into a drinkable substance, much to the confusion of everyone involved. They served grape juice fermented longer than a stretch between elections, creating a concoction that caused wild hallucinations and an inexplicable urge to do the chicken dance in front of the royal court. Just imagine. One sip could transform you into a pharaoh in training, putting you one misstep away from a lifetime of servitude or, worse, bad dancing. As soon as Pharaoh Hotep IX raised his goblet, a ripple of tension coursed through the room. You see, ancient Egyptians believed the moment you sipped wine, your soul danced with Osiris, which in layman's terms means you couldn't escape judgment. They had a ritual wherein the wine was first tasted by the pharaoh's cat, not for quality control, but as a means of good luck. Yes, nothing says fine dining like having a feline ambassador check your vintage. Every time Semet glanced at the cat, eyes narrowing, the tension escalated. Would it approve? Or worse, would it tumble over and herald a food apocalypse? The absurdity peaked when Nefer-Hotep, with trembling hands, poured the wine, only to have the cat interrupt the ceremony by stalking across the table and knocking over 3 full goblets. Gasps echoed like a symphony of Dame de la Drama, and someone fainted, believing that the favor of the gods had just been revoked by a domestic threat. But then, miraculously, the prince's full-bellied laughter rang out. "It's only wine," he bellowed, raising his own goblet. The entire room erupted into laughter, filled with the whimsical idea of a cat dictating their fate. Everyone resumed sipping like carefree banquets amid a hurricane, heads thrown back in abandon as the music swelled, or the local string orchestrators finally gave into the grape's siren call of the afterlife. In that moment, amidst the fake drama and merry fray, it looked like the wine was safe, if not divinely blessed by feline grace. Ah, but history had its own plan. Only later would they discover the fermentation had made the vintage poisonously intoxicating. Most would spend the next week in bed, dreaming of snake charmers and other absurdities, while Nefer-Hotep would abruptly find himself searching for new employment due to the catastrophic hangover recommendations on scrolls never to be unrolled. So here's the takeaway. Never underestimate the cat. In the royal court of ancient Egypt, staying sober was a full-time job, which often came with an ox-sized hangover and a fleet of servants still recovering from your bad decisions. The lesson is clear. Always check who's tasting your wine. It might just turn your royal feast into a comedy of errors that would go down in the history books as Pharaoh's greatest party foul. Picture this. It's the year 2500 BCE, and you've just entered the bustling marketplace of ancient Thebes, where the sun blazes down like an overzealous spotlighter at a talent show. The atmosphere? A delightful blend of ripe dates, sweat, and the unmistakable aroma of fish that has long since questioned its place in the food chain. Vendors shout in an energizing cacophony, attempting to out-yell one another, while simultaneously trying to sell you a questionable assortment of grain and the quarterly issue of Mummification Monthly. Now, enter your protagonist. Nefertiti, a figure so mesmerizing she could summon a sandstorm just by flicking her hair. Today, Nefertiti's craving something simple yet sophisticated, a dinner party-worthy finger food to flaunt to her esteemed guests. What's on her mind? A sandwich, something the ancient Egyptians not only perfected but turned into an art form, or at least a really messy lunch attempt. The setting in Nefertiti's kitchen is, well, let's just say it's no cooking show. The stone walls are lined with hieroglyphics that whisper about failed recipes from the past. The table is cluttered with what resembles a veggie graveyard, wilted lettuce, suspiciously dry bread, and a recent discovery of mold that might just qualify as a pet. The air is thick with the scent of spices, some of which are best left unmentioned. Nefertiti grabs her ingredients, aiming to create a sandwich that could impress even the most skeptical of her subjects. After all, nothing says ancient Egyptian royalty quite like a multi-layered, structured deli meat stack. But here comes the kicker. Ingredients must be buffered by the ethos of purity, courtesy of the neighboring priests who advised against mixing what God had put asunder. In a moment of divine inspiration, Nefertiti decides to violate this sacred culinary decree, layering. One piece of bread smothered with honey, because why not? Next, a sprinkling of crushed locusts for protein, and just a hint of that admittedly very questionable cheese. Almost perfection, until she recalls a disturbing rumor. An entire diplomatic envoy had collapsed last month, allegedly after eating cheese in proximity to sacred relics. Talk about a food fight with aftershocks. And here is where the tension rises. Nefertiti, now neck-deep in paranoia and culinary madness, begins consulting with her trusted circle of advisors. A high priest, a regicidal vizier, and a goat for moral support. The high priest swears he had a dream predicting doom upon any who dare craft this culinary hybrid. The vizier keeps using words like sacrilege and betrayal, while the goat simply wants to nibble on the tablecloth. As the feast draws near, everything comes to a head. Amidst the drama, the servant accidentally knocks over a bowl of honey onto the gritty floor, transforming it into a sticky, forbidden dance floor. Guests arrive, and as soon as they spot the sandwich, they turn to Nefertiti, eyes bulging in horror. A mismatched monster of the mummy's curse, one exclaims, fainting dramatically. But in a bizarre twist, Nefertiti's supposed culinary faux pas becomes a spectacle. Unbeknownst to her, the sandwich is now the centerpiece of a grand debate. Is it divine or devilish? The nation raves about it weeks later, turning the royal kitchen into a bizarre workshop. Egyptians begin creating their interpretations of the mythical Nefertiti sandwich, a sandwich that for centuries has been revered and mocked. As history rolled on, this one sandwich transcended its embarrassing beginnings, becoming a legendary food choice, not for taste, but for the sheer comedic disaster it caused. So, what is the takeaway here? Even when mixing business with pleasure, or honey with locusts, you may stumble upon something disastrous, but at least you will remain a topic of conversation, especially if you inadvertently create a new food crisis. Remember, if you are going to make culinary history, aim for mortifying. It's how legends are born. Picture this. Ancient Egypt, circa 2500 BC. The sun blazes like it's late for an appointment, casting a golden glow over the pyramids, hogging all the social media hashtags, while the Nile flows lazily by, perhaps demanding more followers. And in the heart of this old-world glamour lies the grand banquet hall of Pharaoh Igotaital. As you enter, the air is thick with the smell of incense and roasted goose, mixed inexplicably with an undertone of something that could only be described as too hotto handle, likely the after effects of last night's Egyptian papyrus party. The sound of clashing cymbals mingles with the dulcet tones of a harpist, desperately trying not to think about how much string he's going to need after this gig. Welcome to an evening where delicacies collide with danger. Whether you're of royal blood or just a hapless peasant roped into this gastronomical game of life, the culinary centerpiece tonight is none other than drumroll please, a grand platter of figs and honey. Yes, for the Egyptians, fruit wasn't merely for dessert, it was a gateway drug into a conspiracy of carbs and calories that could potentially upset the balance of the universe. Witness the royal chefs, a questionable ensemble straight out of some twisted game show, battling against the clock and each other. Desperate whispers fill the air. Is it too sweet? Too sticky? Meanwhile, the chief taster, a man whose job description screams deniability, prepares to sample the bounty, a dubious honor, given that the last 5 predecessors apparently left this realm after a culinary catastrophe that had the palace in tears. Now, feast your eyes on the absurd rituals preceding the actual consumption. First, the figs were rolled in a sprinkle of pollen, incidentally made to invoke the blessings of the ancient bee goddess, who, you can bet, would not approve of a bad batch of fruit. Then, gloriously ornate bowls, carved from solid alabaster, were presented, ensuring that every delicious bite was accompanied by a high risk of historical irony. If the nectar was tainted, the pharaoh could taste the sweet specter of betrayal, or just the angry bees from 2 streets over. As the moment of truth approaches, tensions rise like yeast in a hot oven. The servant glances nervously at the crowd, who collectively hold their breath as the pharaoh daintily picks up a fig, a subtle bead of sweat trickling down his temple, likely from the heat or the crushing weight of expectations piled upon his head. Just as he takes a bite, strident chants arise from the crowd, meant to ward off any ill fortune. Hail Osiris! May your figs be fresh, and your honey forever sticky. And then, the flip of fate. The pharaoh's face changes. No longer does he embody the charisma and commanding presence of a sun god, but rather resembles a mortal man who just discovered he's bitten into a rotten fig. Chaos erupts. The high priest fumbles through his scrolls, trying to locate the ancient decree on emergency fig protocol, while royal guards rush to protect the pharaoh against the unforeseen wrath of despised fruits. In the fray, a pet cat, frequently worshipped and now regarded as a tasty morsel, bounds across the floor, scattering figs everywhere, likely letting everyone know exactly what will happen when too sweet goes unchecked. But the plot thickens. It turns out the figs were indeed fine, and the poor pharaoh simply suffered from a minor guttural disturbance. Reinforcements never needed, as it was in fact just a mishap at the last pear harvest festival where the pharaoh had eaten one too many fermented fruits himself. In a twist of irony akin to a comedy of errors, the royal palace swiftly changes course. Recovery resurrects as if baked straight from the oven, with the guards now standing at attention, solemnly fishing figs out of their battle-worn turbans. Thus, by evening's end, the masses emerge, a bit sticky, slightly traumatized but deeply bonded by the collective fury over rogue fruit. The lesson here? An ancient adage rings true. When in doubt about the figs, always consult the nearest cat. Cue the dramatic drum roll. The year, about 1300 BCE. The setting, a lavish, sun-drenched palace where the shadows of ancient gods dance along the walls, as if they too have been invited for dinner. The air? A sensory overload of sizzling meats, pungent spices, and the not-so-subtle odor of too many priests drinking too much wine. Enter the pharaoh, resplendent in gold and linen, with a headpiece so tall it could be classified as its own zip code. Today's royal banquet? A lavish spread including the pièce de résistance, a colossal roast quail, stuffed with figs and adorned with gold leaf because nothing screams deity like edible bling. But it turns out this isn't just a meal. It's a veritable game of culinary roulette. You see, in ancient Egypt, dinner wasn't simply sustenance. It was a battlefield of divine displeasure. In the life of a pharaoh, the culinary stakes were towering, rivaling that of climbing the Great Pyramid. Every cache was scrutinized keenly because any hint of foul play, pun intended, could result in either instant death or, worse yet, being sentenced to an eternity battling the afterlife with a disgruntled scarab. Enter the palace chef, a hapless soul whose job description should have read, "First to go when the wrath of the gods fell upon the banquet." He had to comb through every recipe with the precision of a bomb squad technician, making sure no obsolete ingredients were included, lest Anubis come knocking at the door with a gleaming scythe in hand. To heighten the drama, the feast preparations were rife with superstition. The first course, mortuary bread. A bit grim, but hey, carbs are carbs. Each loaf was baked under the gaze of the high priest while he recited a prayer completely unrelated to food but still somehow deemed necessary. This, the priest hoped, would keep the bread free of the bad vibes of the underworld. But little did they know it was actually the bread that had the last laugh, giving many a guest an uncomfortable after-dinner experience, or, as they dubbed it, the curse of the bad carbs. The dishes were presented one by one, creating a tension-filled atmosphere akin to a game show contest gone wrong. The contestants stood silent, desperate for approval rather than elimination. The chief food taster, a man whose title screamed, "I make bad choices for a living," approached the roast quail with all the enthusiasm of a hostage. He took a deep breath, landed a fork in it, and paused. Would a mouthful of spices lead to adoration or doom? The pharaoh leaned forward, an almost comical look of concern etched across his regal features. The court held its breath. A tiny bite, and the taster's face flushed. Was it the flavor of triumph or the taste of terror? He struggled to find the words, finally proclaiming it delectable. Come gather round, dear audience, for we're diving headfirst into the year 1324 BCE in a bustling marketplace nestled between the luxuriously adorned temples of Karnak and a heap of discarded papyrus scrolls. The sun is shining so brightly that it could start a fire without the aid of a match, which is probably why nobody's wearing any hats. The environment, let's just say it's a captivating bouquet of incense, freshly baked pita, and the distinct odor of fish guts, all wafting through the air and tickling your nostrils in a most unpleasant way. And amongst this aromatic cacophony, we find our unwitting hero, Thutmose the Unfortunate, otherwise known as Thrift Store Thutti, whose day of reckoning is about to ensue over a salad that didn't make the royal cut. Yes, tonight's gourmet dish at the palace isn't just a lovely rocket lettuce salad, but a week's worth of grisly superstition, with an ensemble cast of complaining priests, superstitious scribes, and a band of anxious royal tasters who all have more faith in curses than the actual cuisine. As Thutmose presents the salad to Pharaoh Ramses, a hushed tension blankets the room like the fabric of a very heavy papyrus. You see, lettuce was considered a sacred offering to the god Min, and these greens had traveled through obelisks of daring tales, worm-infested soil, a gusty storm, and an argument between the spice merchants that nearly led to an all-out cucumber war. As the pharaoh lifts his fork, a golden emblem gleaming as brightly as his expectations, the chambers grow silent enough to hear a fly sneeze. Is it fresh, or is it cursed? This isn't just a meal, folks. This is a test of loyalty, hygiene, and perhaps the most contentious issue of all among the nobles. Who forgot to wash the lettuce? The chaos begins to bubble up when the high priest of Amun morphs into an amateur detective, suspiciously eyeing the salad as if it were the last slice of pizza at a teenager's sleepover. He begins to read the signs. Notice the wilt. It is a sign. According to some, unwashed lettuce could invoke the wrath of Min, but the true horror lay in the possibility of an angry curse inadvertently multiplying itself like a chaotic rabbit. What if your lunch leads to an existential crisis of faith and an encore of the 10 plagues? He exclaims, eyebrows wild enough to scare birds away. Faced with a salad teetering on the edge of sacrilege, Thutmose has an epiphany. They must consult the ancient scroll of all curses. A twist of fate ensues when the scribes discover that yesterday's salad was actually the pharaoh's personal palette of potential doom. In a shocking twist, the scroll states that the last high priest who dared to serve unwashed lettuce woke up with a rather unpleasant case of fungus growing out of his ears. A fate worse than death in the royal hierarchy. As all eyes sink back to the pharaoh, he takes a defiant bite, much like a contestant on a dubious reality show featuring culinary disaster. Unceremoniously, he chews, looking both perplexed and mildly horrified while retaining an oddly regal composure. What is it, you ask? It turns out Thutmose had switched the cursed ingredients with delicious roasted chickpeas. The entire mood lifts. Everyone, even the priests, forgets the taste of the rebellious salad. The priests breathe a sigh of relief. The scribes resume their glowering, and the pharaoh, after momentarily considering a new debate on the consequences of legumes in society, raises his goblet in approval. So, what have we gleaned from this unfortunate kitchen nightmare? Sometimes, letting go of your curses and trusting in the power of chickpeas and well-washed greens will keep you alive longer than any ancient Egyptian spell ever would. And let's face it, the only curse worth fearing is a salad made from leftovers. Picture this. The year is approximately 2500 BCE. The sun is searing down on the vast expanse of the Egyptian desert. And what better way to show off your divine status than to throw a banquet worthy of the gods? Or at least a mildly successful pharaoh. Welcome to the magnificent halls of the pharaoh Khufu, where the atmosphere is tinged with the heady aroma of roasted meats and a hint of nervous sweat, likely from the poor souls tasked with serving. The air is alive with the cacophony of laughter, clinking goblets, and the distant roar of the Nile River, mingled with the unmistakable sound of scheming. Here, the food is not merely nourishment, but a potential ticket to glory, or the worst day of your life. Enter Neferet, head of the royal kitchen, clutching a platter of figs stuffed with a curious concoction of spices. She wears an expression that can only be described as both proud and deeply anxious, ready to impress the pharaoh while simultaneously dreading the infamous curse of the Sphinx, a superstition that suggests improperly presented food can bring about divine retribution. As Neferet venerates her fig arrangement, 5 feet away, a group of nobles is engaged in what can only be dubbed the Pharaoh's Challenge, interpreting the inscrutable expression on Khufu's face. He takes a sip of wine, then closely inspects a roasted sparrow. Tension thickens like aged cheese. Could this bird hold the key to his mood? What if it's dry? What if it was the sparrow who inadvertently insulted a temple priest on some long-forgotten Wednesday? In this moment of palpable tension, the pharaoh rises, stroking his perfectly coiffed beard, sending a ripple of panic among his guests. Each noble thinks, is he about to proclaim a new law? Or should we simply invoke the wrath of the gods? But no, it's about the food. Khufu moans and Lorcace in ecstasy at the figs. The nobles share glances like they are huddled in a secret conspiracy, all trying to guess the outcome. But the real stars of the night are the figs, which are soon discovered to be enchanted, curses included. As the nobles indulge, some start to choke dramatically on the seeds, a sight that could give any modern drama a run for its money. One noble begins to sweat profusely, while another collapses into a fit of what can only be described as too much spice. Much like a tragic playlet performed at festival season. Laughter turns to concern, and back to laughter as Neferet attempts to revive her hapless aristocrats, shouting age-old incantations meant for precisely this occasion. The food had either unlocked a great secret or opened the floodgates of ancient mischief in the royal court. Then there's a sudden gasp from the back of the hall. Shadows congeal around a figure, a priest, conspicuously absent from the festivities, now clutching a scroll revealing the recipe of doom. "Behold," he bellows, "the gods were never meant to swallow your kitchen secrets." Khufu, perplexed, realizes that not only his dessert but the fate of his reign dangled precariously from the delicate roots of those figs. With one final flourish, Neferet proclaims, "Fear not." The ingredients were sourced directly from the Nile and blessed by the temple of Bastet. A momentary hush envelops the room, profound in its absurdity. And just like that, culinary history was rewritten over an unassuming platter of figs, a cocktail of chaos and divine favor, destined to live on in the annals of royal feasting lore. History tells us that crises are but moments waiting to happen, especially in a banquet setting where the food seems charged with supernatural consequences. So, the lesson your 21st century self can learn: never underestimate the power of figs and, consider hiring a food critic instead of a high priest. Lights dim, and a sunbeam pierces through a cloud of dust, illuminating the bustling market of Thebes around 1450 BCE. Vendors shout at the top of their lungs, extolling the virtues of their goods. Brightly colored linens, jars of mystery oils, and, most importantly, stacks of onions the size of small children. Yes, folks, if you thought last month's pumpkin spice craze was wild, wait until you experience the ancient Egyptians and their fervent obsession with all things onion. The atmosphere brims with energy, filled with the pungent smell of fresh produce and the sinking realization that you, dear time traveler, have mistakenly wandered into a culinary bad dream. Between the laughter of children and the furious haggling of housewives over the price of leeks, you would hear the sacrificial cries of the onions, revered as both food and, curiously, an object of devotion. Let's not forget that they were also believed to guard against evil spirits, which is quite a marketing angle for something that smells like a hot spring on a bad day. Enter our star Hatshepsut, Egypt's most famous female pharaoh, expertly dodging accusations of fraud while balancing an impressive crown atop her head and potentially several more below. She strides up to a market stall, aiming to reassert the kingdom's prosperity with a simple onion-based recipe she claims will detoxify even the most insatiable stomachs. But wait, the ancient Egyptians had an interestingly unfounded sense of food-related paranoia. Certain onions were presumed to contain mystical properties, capable of transforming a humble meal into a veritable feast fit for the gods. Sounds delightful, right? But also very much like asking the chef to sprinkle a little magic on your salad. The catch? If you picked the wrong onion, well, let's just say you might turn yourself into a walking curse rather than a culinary delight. The tension rises as Hatshepsut carefully chooses her ingredients. The crowd watches in palpable anticipation, half expecting the onions to levitate as she combines them into a glorious pyramid of seasoning. Yet, behind the scenes, the high priest, convinced that the goddess Hathor has been displeased with the onion harvest, is frantically burning incense and banging a tambourine while chanting incomprehensible rhymes like, "O onions, O deities, please don't bring calamities." Meanwhile, the groundskeeper accidentally spills a bucket of goat milk on the cabbages nearby, leading to complications that could only be likened to an ancient version of a reality show gone wildly awry. As the tension hits a fever pitch, Hatshepsut, now teetering on the brink of culinary glory and existential doom, takes a bold step. She boldly proclaims, "A feast shall commence to demonstrate the wonders of this great veg." A grand banquet is set, but in the melee of excitement, her chosen onions are mistaken for their lesser, stinkier cousins, the ones known for literally making people cry. As guests arrive, confusion abounds. Noses are wrinkled, chefs furiously shuffle back and forth, and someone drops a whole tray of roasted birds, sending panicked courtiers diving for cover. At the toast, she raises her glass of papyrus juice and says, "To the onions." The crowd hesitatively toasts back, only for the fluttering aroma of baked onions to twist into a flavor cloud of regret and sniffles. The banquet becomes an impromptu onion-themed tragedy, with many fanning their red faces, unsure whether to laugh or cry, of course, inevitably ending in a chorus of the former. Historical context: onions, while a revered ingredient, were integral to funerary practices and were believed to symbolize eternal life. So much for keeping all that in mind while dodging endless tears. And the moral of the story: when in ancient Egypt, remember, an onion in the hand is worth 2 flavorless bites at the end of the feast. And always consult your local priest before inciting a taste test. Cue the dramatic music. The year: 2500 BCE. The setting: a bustling marketplace in ancient Egypt, where vendors shout praises for their wares. The air: thick with the scent of sulfur and baked bread, an aroma so intoxicating that it makes you forget they didn't have gluten-free options back then. Enter the pharaoh. Not just any pharaoh, Ramesses II, a man whose ego was larger than his empire, which, if you're counting, was quite expansive. He strolls through the debris of disintegrating wheat and a chorus of enthusiastic husks. Tonight's grand feast? Why, only the finest barley bread imaginable, soft enough to be mistaken for clouds, and yet dense enough to fend off the most determined tax collector. In theory, just bread, right? In practice, a culinary catastrophe waiting to happen. Because in ancient Egypt, bread wasn't merely sustenance. It was the original politically charged carbohydrate. You wanted to rule? You leveled your opponent with a loaf, You wanted a prosperous afterlife? You made sure your tomb was stashed with bread loaves of various shapes and sizes and prayed that they wouldn't turn into a heavy, gluten-laden boulder. So enter Ramesses, with ceremonial flair, and his entourage of priests obsessed with blending piety and pastries like a bodega's muffin selection on steroids. The bread was prepared in a temple of worship, overflowing with limestone ovens, smoke, undying prayers, and a very confused cat that thought it was all a glorified yoga studio. But it gets better. The recipe? Secret. The flour? Milled by hand, with the subtle touches of sacrificial ritual. You see, each loaf went through a bizarre obsession with ancient incantations. Our beloved pharaoh's name had to be inscribed in hieroglyphics on the dough, downside being one furious baker's finger stuck to the benediction, resembling a pizza-shaped disaster. Now, an added dose of tension, the so-called curse of the bread. They believed that any loaf not prayed over or left unattended might sprout legs and run away. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, bread had a mind of its own in this era. Guards were stationed at baking stations, glaring at unsuspecting loaves like they were would-be assassins plotting an escape. The tension reached its zenith when Ramesses, feeling mighty and famished, reached for the centerpiece of this culinary spectacle. The moment of truth had arrived. He was about to make history, or at least a mess. Just as he lifted the loaf, an audacious temple priest, worried the pharaoh might choke on a crumb of divine retribution, yelled, "No! Uncircumcised flour presents an omen." Cue gasps. The bread dropped to the ground. Dread engulfed the banquet hall. Would the pharaoh be punished for wanting to eat? Was the bread evil? Did divine justice involve carb shaming? As the priests convened, muttering something about balance in the universe and the ancient art of redistribution, one brave unofficial historian, an amateur charlatan named Ankh, peered skeptically toward the loaf and declared, "My pharaoh, it's just yeast. Regular yeast." Sighs of relief rolled over the chamber. Ramesses rolled his eyes, picked up the loaf, and turned it into a new power play, declaring that the sacred bread must now be eaten only by royals, echoing, "Let it be known throughout the kingdom. Ye who scorn the yeast shall reap the whirlwind of hunger." And just like that, sourdough was out. Elitism was artfully in. So what did we learn? In ancient Egypt, even bread could be a power play. But if you don't want your carbs to come with an existential crisis, don't aim for the throne. Better yet, stick with oat biscuits and the value of nameless loaves. Welcome to ancient Egypt, circa 1300 BC, where the air is thick with the smell of untreated grain and the faint echo of somebody yelling about the Nile flooding. Yet again. The sun is shining so brightly, it practically smiles down at the absurdity of life below. And here you are, marching into a temple that doubles as a questionable buffet. Picture this: a vast courtyard filled with priests in immaculate white linen, who look preposterously serious for a bunch of people whose biggest concern is which way to align the grape offering. The sunlight glints off the holy symbols painted on the walls, while the sounds of chanting float in the air, creating a bizarre cocktail of piety and impending food-related chaos. The feast today? A tragic mix of stale bread, overcooked fowl, and the bizarre centerpiece, a wine offering so watered down It's basically Nile swill. As we approach the main event, a spectacular banquet meant to appease the gods, we meet our host, the High Priest, a man with a beard so impressive it must be holding secrets from the afterlife. His only job? To ensure the food doesn't just go to the gods, but actually gets to the gods. A task so bewildering it might as well be herding cats in the middle of a grain silo. Now, you'd think that feeding gods is simple. Just toss some bread and wind their way and call it a day, right? Wrong. The preparation process is an exercise in farce. First, there's the ceremonial washing of the hands, which is more a show of devotion than actual cleanliness. Just don't ask what's on that linen. Then comes the painstaking ritual of placing the food on the altar in a specific order, while chanting incantations that really sound like a bad rhythm, and Blue's album title, 3,000 Eggs to Ra. But here's where it gets interesting, and more than a bit absurd. After the food is artfully arranged, the priests perform a particularly ludicrous dance involving shuffling, clapping, and a lot of exaggerated sipping of invisible wine. Why? Because the theory is that you have to invite the gods to come and partake in the food, otherwise they may sulk and cause floods or worse, plagues. The tension rises. As the high priest meticulously leans over the altar, every twitch in his linen robe echoes like a ticking time bomb of divine wrath. A fly lands on the bread. Everyone gasps. Flies are the least of your problems when the gods are hangry. Just as the high priest raises his ceremonial knife, presumably to slice along the holy lines of meat, our eyes widen at what's unfolding. The food is offered, only to be rattled by the winds of fate or Walmart brand incense. And then it happens. An overzealous temple guard sneezes, setting off a chain reaction akin to a toppling domino display made of ancient Egyptian pottery. Sacrifices and the precious bread go flying. The oohs and ahs of prayer quickly shift to the oops and oohos of panic. What's the worst that could possibly happen? The gods get jealous? Maybe they just wanted to snack in peace. Surprisingly, rather than impending doom, the skies respond with a gust of wind so strong it sweeps away most of the mess, while the remains of yesterday's meal remain eerily still for a moment before swirling around like some divine food tornado against the backdrop of baffled faces. The ensuing chaos leads to laughter, not terror, and the scene becomes a symposium of divine humor. You see, the gods apparently work on a scale non-existent in the culinary world. They don't want your well-prepared goose, they just want a show. So, rather than cursing those who failed to offer, they delightedly consumed the joyous energy of the flustered guests. In the end, the high priest mutters something about being blessed by the rush of 1,000 meals, and as it turns out, a divine comedy of errors managed to entertain not only the guests, but also the gods. So, moral of the story? In ancient Egypt, you might not just observe food offerings. You might unwittingly become part of an operatic disaster featuring a hefty dose of spiritual laughter. Who needs fast food when you can have divine delivery? Sure, eating is great, but entertaining the gods? That's where the true magic lies. Welcome to ancient Egypt, circa 2500 BCE, where the sun is hot enough to fry an egg on a pyramid, and the air smells like roasted barley and questionable choices. In a society where hieroglyphics tell tales of gods and pharaohs, one element ruled the hearts of the people: beer. Yes, folks, this golden nectar was revered not just as a staple drink, but as currency, meal replacement, and maybe even a guilty pleasure after a long day of bricklaying. Picture this: a bustling tavern in Thebes, the flickering light of oil lamps casting ominous shadows on the walls, while patrons engage in a raucous debate over who really built the pyramids. Hint: not the aliens. Amid the boisterous laughter and the occasional hiccup from the local scribe after a few too many pints, the smell of fermented barley wafts enticingly through the air, mixed with the faint stink of yesterday's fish market. It's the perfect recipe for camaraderie and the imminent disaster of ill-advised decisions. Enter our protagonist, Hoppy, the royal beer taster. Yes, this is a position that comes with a hefty dose of responsibility. If you're Hoppy, you're literally the first in line to sip the king's brew. And there's an added layer of pressure because nobody wants to find out the hard way that the king's drink is less hoppy and more poisonous. Now, as Hoppy sits on his throne of barley cushions, his eyes dart apprehensively towards the amphorae. Tales of ill-fated tasters who have met their end with one sip of a cursed brew linger in the air like the last remnants of a bad hangover. The preparation of beer involved a kind of alchemical ritual: large vats bubbling, offerings made to the goddess Hathor, and a rigorous inspection for, rogue snake venom or the odd scorpion. Think of it as the ancient Egyptian version of sleeping with one eye open. Hoppy prepares for the first sip that could either earn him accolades or send him to an early meeting with Anubis. The ale is poured into a vessel intricately adorned with Eye of Horus motifs, the protective function of which apparently does little against bad brewing. He raises the cup to his lips, the moment slowing down. A montage of faces from his life flashing before him, each taunting him about dietary choices he should have avoided in favor of safer hobbies, like carpentry or pottery. Just as he dips his mouth into the brew, the bartender, a brawny fellow named Thutmose, shouts, "Stop! Don't you remember last month's batch? You're still wearing the bandages from that last taste." Tension hangs thick in the air as Hoppy, caught mid-sip, contemplates whether to blindly follow through with the ritual or heed his friend's warning. The room collectively holds its breath as his eyes widen. Did he drown in the depths of barley and water, or had he uncorked the elixir of life? As everyone prepares for the worst, Hoppy swallows, and instead of collapsing into a heap, his face lights up, signaling deliverance from fear. "Ah, refreshing," he declares, a hint of mint and a touch of something mildly toxic. "I dare say it's better than last month's batch." Picture this. The year is 2500 BC, and the scene is a grand banquet hall in the heart of Thebes, illuminated by the flickering light of thousands of carefully positioned oil lamps that must have taken years off anyone's life with their smoke. The air is thick with the aroma of roasted duck and honey, and a constant buzz of nobility, who are likely plotting against each other in sheer envy over who gets to eat the first piece of falafel. Enter Pharaoh Khufu, a man whose headpiece is larger than his sense of fear. He saunters in, greeted by a chorus of priests who have presumably been rehearsing this moment as if it were the final act of a tragic opera. But instead of singing, they are chanting something that vaguely sounds like it could cause an international incident if misheard. The centerpiece of the evening, An extravagant salad, but not just any salad. A salad so majestic it practically has its own zip code, the pharaohs' special lettuce. Why is this salad so special, you ask? Let's dive into the absurdity. Set against the backdrop of bustling servants and obelisks that are designed for aesthetic more than structural integrity, the salad's preparation begins. It's not tossed together willy-nilly. No, this is a carefully curated, superstitious event. First, the lettuce is harvested by a sacred group of chosen leaf pickers who have trained for this special moment since childhood. Their job is as much about finesse as it is about not sneezing on the greens, lest they summon the wrath of Ra himself. Next, the assembled lettuce is washed in water drawn from the Nile, because nothing says gourmet like straight from a river known for its crocodiles. Then comes the fragrant herbs and spices, all mixed amid chants to ward off evil spirits. It turns out a little sprinkle of dill was believed to keep various curses at bay. One can only wonder what they were having with their sandwich the other day. But hold on to your ceremonial headdresses. This salad comes with a twist. After the presentation, before anyone can even reach for a fork, the Royal Food Palate Inspector, aka the guy who lives in constant fear of both culinary ghosts and his job security, inspects the dish. His every sniff and nibble could trigger a response closer to a military coup than a simple dinner course. The nobles are wrestling with the fear that he might declare it tastes like treason, and their heads literally and metaphorically hang in the balance. Just as Khufu lifts a piece of the prized lettuce to his mouth, chaos erupts. A totally bemused, hungry cat saunters into the banquet hall, eyes gleaming with potential shenanigans. The guards panic. A few nearly drop their weapons. Someone shouts something unintelligible about correcting the blessings of the salad. Meanwhile, the pharaoh freezes, torn between the overwhelming need to uphold his rule and the innate desire to shove this divine mix of greens down his throat. It becomes an inadvertent standoff between a salad and the world's most confused feline. At last, after what feels like an eternity filled with salad-related drama, the cat slinks back into the shadows, and the food inspector decides that since the lettuce has faced such a monumental test of chaos, it is clearly blessed and safe to eat. This is a moment where logic takes a leave of absence entirely. As the nobles breathe a collective sigh of relief, the pharaoh takes one triumphant bite, only to grimace. "Too much dressing," he murmurs with a perplexed frown, prompting a rush to discern if the dressing was indeed a covert attempt by a rival power to poison him, despite it tasting shockingly like olive oil. Instead, they discover it's merely an unfortunate blend of the olive oil sacrificially dedicated to the gods that was outdated circa last summer. Long story short, the crisis that brewed from the lettuce revealed a moral of its own. When dining with the gods, maybe stick with bread and honey. So what's the takeaway here? In ancient Egypt, even your salad could decide the fate of empires. Remember, if it seems like a salad, walks like a salad, but might provoke divine suspicion, don't order it. Cue the dramatic sound of 1,000 hieroglyphs being painstakingly chiseled. The year, approximately 1300 BC. The setting? An opulent Egyptian temple adorned with so many golden statues that they appeared to be auditioning for a low-budget, star-studded blockbuster. The air? Thick with incense, sarcasm, and the unmistakable aroma of foods that were only slightly expired. If you counted the last millennium as a benchmark. Enter the high priest, clad in layers of linen that could choke an unsuspecting cat. With a hairdo that resembled a particularly aggressive crow, he's here for the ceremonial banquet that's about to turn into a gourmet's worst nightmare. Tonight's culinary centerpiece? A roasted goose stuffed with, well, they weren't entirely sure. They just hoped it was not last week's sacrificial offering that had somehow clucked its way out of the afterlife. The atmosphere is electric, or more like a nervous short circuit. The candles flicker uncertainly, catching on the massive stone figures that seem poised to judge every single culinary decision. And let's not forget the food, laid out before the assembled nobles like a scene from a disaster film, where the main character is suspiciously allergic to grain. Tension mounts as our high priest performs his longest-standing ritual, the drum roll of delicious anxiety. It involves a ceremonial drum that rivals today's biggest concert venues, played by a drummer so nervous that he's sweating like it's an audition for America's Got Talent. The priest begins chanting incantations over the fowl, kneeling in reverence to the gastronomic horror that could potentially explode into divine retribution. Suddenly, whispers ripple through the crowd. Did someone see a rat scurry across the banquet table? Or perhaps it was a divine sign, a rat-sized omen foretelling doom. The nobles are starting to squirm, recalling tales told by their grandmothers about how a single whiff of spoiled meat can attract the attention of a deity looking for a higher caliber sacrifice. The murmurs grow into a full-on panic as they consult their oracle, a pessimistic scribe with a penchant for over-exaggeration. His eyes unwiden with horror. What if the goose doesn't want to be eaten? As the high priest places the platter onto a grand table, adorned with jewels that could pay off half of Egypt's taxes, suspense reaches its peak. Would this goose be more divine than dinner? Would its flesh be edible enough to ward off wrath? The room holds its collective breath, not unlike those ancient Egyptians during every single solar eclipse. Just as the high priest prepares to slice into the roast with a ceremonial dagger, a weapon that once belonged to a pharaoh with a very bad experience involving a similar fowl, the goose suddenly flops. Yes, flops. Apparently, it was still alive, making its escape as the crowd gasped in horror. In an age where offering a living, breathing creature to the gods was the norm, humanity had just crossed into the absurd. After a sudden chase chronically documented in temple annals, the high priest manages to catch it, lamenting divine providence or just poor planning. Before anyone can respond, a swarm of priests tackle the unfortunate bird in a flurry of linen and hysterical chanting. Eventually, and completely absurdly, the goose becomes more of a comedic anecdote than an actual divinely inspired feast. As it's carted off for what would be an even more unbelievable rescue operation, the nobles sigh in relief. No divine intervention necessary here. Dinner? Well, let's just say it left a little to be desired, and more correctly, was saved for a stand-up routine at the Royal Comedy Festival next week. Thus ends our scene of culinary chaos, and perhaps a lesson in the importance of checking the pulse of your dinner before presentation. So what's the takeaway? Never trust a roast that can outrun you, and if you want to impress the gods, maybe consider takeout. As we wrap up our whimsical jaunt through the sun-baked sands of ancient Egypt and step into the lush jungles of Mesoamerica, it's time to reflect on one of the core follies of humanity, the delusion that we somehow control the creatures that share our planet. Yes, Everyone thinks they're the master of the household when they strut around berating their feline overlords for knocking down a glass of water or scolding the family dog for that unspeakable deed in the backyard. The truth is, we are but unwitting jesters in a grand soap opera of animal vengeance. Think about it. For every time you coax that sweet old Labrador into playing fetch, there's a tiny, barely noticeable revolution brewing in the minds of house pets everywhere, plotting their delightful revenge at the most inconvenient times. History has proven that animals are not merely passive observers in our stories. They are the stars with scripts of their own. From the revolt of the cats of the ancient world, who could have easily walked off to start their own regimes, to the infamous biting of the postman that led to centuries of canine male-carrier tension, animal vengeance runs deep. Even in Egyptian mythology, one can argue that the goddess Bastet had a legitimate case against humanity. After all, who wouldn't after having that many relics of their own images carved only to end up in some dusty museum? So here's a lesson for you. When the pooch cocks his head and looks at you with those soulful eyes, remember, you could very well be witnessing the calm before the storm. Maybe that tail isn't as waggingly joyous as you think. Perhaps it's merely winding up for the greatest prank in history, where you're the unsuspecting target. In conclusion, as we part ways, let's embrace the comedic reality that in the great play of life, we may consider ourselves the directors, but it's the animals who hold the dramatic tension and comedic punchlines. Just remember this memorable takeaway. The next time Fido appears to snub you upon returning home, just know he's not simply disappointed. He might very well be plotting the next great escape, all while looking adorable.